giving freely of ourselves, and what that means, what that feels like, and how we all gain. And that's become a really special topic to me recently, because we all have things in our lives that need some help. On a personal level or in the community, certainly our world does, and we'd like some solutions, especially when it comes to the big stuff, our health, well-being, professional lives and careers, relationships, particularly when maybe what we've tried so far hasn't been as successful as we'd like. And I've been there. I know what that feels like. But I'm also learning more of what truly brings solutions. And so, the ideas in Christian Science, and including the approach that I'm going to talk about today, have given me the basis for a bigger, better life. That's what I want to talk about. But I think they've given a bigger, better life to folks around me, too. Sometimes without their even realizing, where the blessing is coming from. This way of giving of ourselves touches the world. I know that sounds big. It is big. That's what we're going to talk about today. And if you're thinking, wow, I wasn't really looking for a whole new experience. I was really looking for comfort and healing and guidance and that type of thing. Please know that you've come to the right place, too. The ideas that we're talking about today are just the basis for healing and comfort. That's why I call it kind of an unexpected way forward. And that's what we'll be talking about. So to illustrate that, I want to just jump into a story here. And it's about a high school kid who was doing this, maybe reluctantly at first, found it within himself to give freely. And then how he and those around him gained. He was about 16 years old and had struggled for several days with a sore mouth and swollen face, really sore jaw, because his wisdom teeth were coming in, but not in a comfortable way. In fact, he wasn't even able to eat properly. He was getting by on smoothies and juice and ice cream, stuff like that. And stoicism, because he wasn't going to let anybody help him. He was going to get through this himself. He didn't really want to hear what his parents had to say. He was just going to get through it. Now, he'd had some experience turning to prayer, turning to God when things were difficult, and finding healing. His parents were Christian Scientists, and so that was kind of what their family did. And so one evening when the discomfort was particularly noticeable, he decided to go up to his room and think about how he wanted to go forward. And he could hear the whole family downstairs making dinner together, and he thought, okay, no more tough guy here. I'm going to reach out for some help. And so he called a practitioner of Christian Science. Not me, but somebody like me, whose full-time job is taking prayer requests and responding with Christian Science treatment and healing. The prayer aspect of Christian Science treatment doesn't have any physical element to it. There's no laying of hands or touching or anything like that. It's communing with God. Communing with God in a way that stirs something new in thought. That aligns our thought with God, aligns our thought with truth. And that transforms our outlook, of course, and that transforms our experience. That was just the type of thing this kid wanted. And so the Christian Science practitioner agreed to pray for him. And then they just chatted a little bit after that. And the kid mentioned that he was in the process of buying a new motorcycle. He was really excited about this. He couldn't wait. He was really proud of the new bike he picked out, excited for this new chapter of independence and freedom and manhood. His parents were not so excited. They were concerned about his safety. He was about 16, that he seemed kind of young to them to be getting a fast motorcycle. So the practitioner just said one thing to this young man. She said, "Is getting the motorcycle right now worth a conflict with your parents?" not get the bike as soon as possible. Okay, that was a new thought to him. But I think something in maybe the way the practitioner had been praying earlier that morning, or something in their conversation had kind of softened his heart or softened his outlook. Because as he started to think about it, he realized, okay, yeah, that's actually something I can do. I can graduate high school, wait a couple years, graduate high school, move out, and then buy the motorcycle. And he tells me that when he made that decision, he actually felt relieved. So the two of them finish their conversation, he hangs up the phone, and he realizes in that moment that all the symptoms are gone. That the swelling that had been distorting his face for days, just instantly gone. His jaw felt great, his teeth felt great. He went downstairs and had a nice normal meal with his family, first time in days. And then over the next many weeks, his wisdom teeth came in naturally and normally and comfortably. He still has them today, in good working order. And the motorcycle came along at the right time too. That decision that he made to do the bigger thing, do the better thing. He wasn't thinking of himself when he decided not to buy the motorcycle. He was thinking, what's gonna make things go better for my household, for my family? He might not have used those words, but he was thinking bigger. That decision didn't cause him to lose anything good at all. It was just the opposite. He gained, well, he said, a sense of relief and freedom, joy. I think he found a better relationship with his parents. I think there was more mutual respect there. I think he found more, this is my impression, freedom and manhood and maturity in that decision than he was going to find in the bike. And he found unexpectedly quick, remarkable physical healing. He found that unexpected way forward. I think anytime we find ourselves in a situation like that, where we feel stuck, and it could be for any reason. It could be that, you're in pain or something like that, but it could also be just, you went through a breakup, or you got fired from your job, or just you feel sad about something. Anytime we feel stuck that way, what really seems to make a difference, what really seems to move the needle, is that kind of humility that the kid showed, or sacrifice. Bear with me on the word sacrifice. I know that word's not always popular, but sacrifice is oddly rewarding, because it shows us that our happiness, our joy, is not as based on getting the thing we want or our plan going through as we thought it was. Actually, our happiness flows a lot more freely than that. It really comes from, like the kid found, contributing to the good that's going on and being part of that. I think anytime we feel stuck that way, there is a higher perspective or a larger context that we can find, like he did, that's filled with healing solutions. But I can't talk about those healing solutions or that larger context without talking about God. And so that's really where I want to start here. I want to talk about God and God's nature, and us and our nature. And then we'll talk about prayer a little bit. Prayer, as we saw, is such a catalyst for good in our lives. And then Jesus, probably the world's best example of somebody giving freely of himself. And then I'll share a couple modern day examples of folks who did this and found the reward. So my job as a Christian Science practitioner just impels me, I think, I have a contractual obligation to learn more about God all the time. And at least try to deepen my understanding of God and of prayer. And in doing that, I've discovered that it's really important not to relegate God to the role of superhuman, that's kind of distant in our everyday lives. And I've found that if I see myself starting to do that, which I think is fairly common. I mean, we often don't mean to do that. We often don't mean to limit our sense of God if we're thinking about God. But if I find myself starting to do that, the Bible is actually a really good antidote to that, especially the New Testament. It puts forward this view of God as divine love. You know, not a superhuman, but a presence, not something that judges or condemns or withholds, but something that welcomes and encourages and heals. I think the Bible says God is a very present help in trouble. We can also think of God as infinite spirit that animates us, you know, and that creates the universe, that works on our behalf. When you start thinking of God in those terms, I mean, as this presence of divine love or infinite spirit, it just feels different. I mean, you start seeing that, okay, this is what makes the universe go forward. This is the animating intelligence of creation. You know, it's God as spirit or as love that helps us discover within what we most need. It's there, but it awakens us to that. When you feel impelled towards something good, it's divine love that's doing that. So that's just a little something of God's infinite loving nature. I like going back to that because I feel like every time I do, it just kind of, what's the word I want? It reinvigorates my understanding of whatever I'm thinking about, you know, because I know the source. The source is God, is good. So I think once we kind of establish something of God's nature, it takes more than a couple minutes, but we're getting a start there. Once we establish that, then a really natural question is, what about us and our nature? I mean, I think that's something that humanity has thought about forever, practically. They talk about it in the Bible. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're referred to in terms of God. That's why I want to start with God. In Psalms, it says, "It is God that hath made us, not we ourselves. We are God's people." So we're people of divine love. You know, we're people of infinite spirit. That sounds cool. That sounds expansive. I like the way that sounds. And that gives you something really substantial to think about. And you probably already have. I mean, you know, chances are you've thought about or at least wondered if your core identity wasn't so much more than what's seen on the surface. And I think we kind of know that intuitively. You know, I think we know that we're so much more than something physical that eats and breathes and tries not to get sick. If we're God's people, then we're like God. Just like works of art are like the artist that made them. Works of art show the nature and thoughts of the artist. And we show the nature and then the essence of God. We're innately kind and wise and capable. We're innately capable of loving our neighbor, for example, even when it seems difficult, or trying something new and being good at it the first time. That possibility is built into us. And if God is spirit that created the universe and we're God's people, that means that everything in the universe, including us, is inherently spiritual in nature. That is a huge statement. I know that. That's a really broad brushstroke. We could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about what it means to be spiritual. And that would be fun. It would be good. But for just briefly, I'll say that means that there's nothing limited or limiting or incomplete built into us. You know, we are infinitely capable of expressing all the qualities of God without limitation. And that's the reality of the universe for everybody. And prayer shows us that good reality. I spoke earlier about this high school kid who found some nice healing, success, progress when he turned to prayer. What was going on there? Or how can we do that, really? There are a lot of ways to pray. I'm sure there are as many ways to pray as there are people in San Luis Obispo, and more. But one element that's common to every sincere prayer, I think, is just a deep desire to be more aware of God's presence in our lives. And that's what we want, to feel it, to feel welcomed by divine love, or to feel informed by infinite mind, to feel animated by divine spirit. That kind of prayer is communion with God. I mean, when you have that experience, you can't help but discover something about yourself too. I mean, I think we become more aware in those moments of our own spiritual nature. And I've discovered that in those moments of discovery, spiritual discovery, my goals kind of change. And maybe whatever pushed me to pray in the first place, some problem or argument or, desire or whatever, that can kind of take a back seat now to the larger ideas that are coming to me from God. That's so cool when that happens. I mean, you end up praying about something bigger than you thought you were going to. And then that uplifted sense isn't something that you're trying to make happen. It's reality. I mean, that's why I use the word discovery. It's reality. And then we get to experience it. I mean, I might in prayer, for example, become more aware that as an expression of God, I'm naturally, innately joyful and purposeful. Ideas like that land really well, even if you're not feeling joyful and purposeful right in the moment. When they come to us from divine love, they ring true because you experience it. I might, after having that insight about joy and purpose, I might wake up the next morning an hour earlier than I thought I was going to without trying and get everything done more joyfully and more purposefully than I thought I could. That's the kind of experience that we can expect when we turn to prayer. But prayer isn't about changing things. It's about discovery. It's discovering the good that God is bringing out in us and letting that move us forward to do something good and big. It's finding that larger context. Prayer shows us that larger context of God that includes everybody. So let's talk about somebody that was consistently in that larger context. We all are, actually. That's all of us. But somebody who was just really aware of it. Somebody who saw humility and good works and moral courage as a way of life, as a way of impelling everybody forward, not just himself. You probably know I'm talking about Christ Jesus. I think because of his healing works alone, feeding the multitudes with a very small amount of food, or curing disease that was considered incurable, permanently uplifting lives. I think because of all that, we can recognize Jesus as a really good example of somebody giving freely of himself. And that's why I want to talk about him today. Jesus' example, and especially his teachings, show us the value of this, show us the value of giving freely of ourselves, and what that looks like and feels like, and shows us that we're better at it than we think. I think sometimes when we feel stuck, like I talked about earlier, we think, wow, the best thing I can do today is kind of get through the day. Maybe stay under the radar, so maybe somebody else will do something, or maybe my circumstances will change or something like that. But Jesus showed us that even in circumstances like that, and I admit it takes some spiritual hunger, it takes some desire to grow, but even in circumstances like that, the ball is in our court more than we realize. Jesus showed us what to do and how to do it. That there's something tangible we can do even in those moments of feeling stuck. There's something, tangible that we can do. And this is what's rather new to me. I probably couldn't have given this lecture 3 years ago. I didn't know this unexpected way forward. But this is what I'm discovering It really has to do with love. Maybe a sharper or more effective sense of love. It has to do with contributing to the good that's going on. Maybe stepping up to the plate in new ways. Doing things that we didn't realize we could do. Jesus had a unique relationship with God. He saw everything in terms of divine love and what divine love was enabling. And because of that, he was always discovering more of the healing power of divine love. And he wanted everybody, from his followers then to us today, to experience that love and that healing power as much as possible. There's this great scene where he's talking to his disciples, and he tells them that if they can love one another, even when it's difficult, because I can imagine being a disciple of Jesus might have been difficult, and getting along with your co-disciples might have been difficult. And he tells them that if they can love one another as he did, if they can do that consistently, they'll find reliable joy. That so tracks with what we're talking about today. Our joy comes from doing that type of thing, loving big and contributing to the good going on around us, doing new things. There are a lot of different ways that we can do that. We're not all going to wait 2 years and then buy a motorcycle. That was the right way forward for the first guy that I talked about. But I have found that when we're really yearning for healing, yearning for something new for ourselves or for somebody else, and we get quiet, maybe pray in some of the ways that I talked about already, there often comes a nudge from divine love about how we might give more of ourselves. And I know that's maybe not expected. There might be something that we can give up, or something that we can contribute more to. For one person, it might be taking on an assignment at work that you felt kind of intimidated by. Maybe your boss thinks you're ready for it, but it just sounds like out of your league. It might mean taking on that job and that assignment and seeing the good that comes out of that. For somebody else, it could mean forgiveness. That's a big one. That's a big one for me, I think. Maybe there's somebody in your past that you feel like has been hurtful. Maybe you haven't thought about them in a while. Forgiving them and finding ways to support them going forward, even. Giving more could mean sharing a testimony of healing with a friend that you don't usually talk to about God. Maybe being willing to kind of expand your relationship with them that way. Or that would be a case of giving, sharing, talking more, finding the moral courage to do that. Sometimes loving means talking less. Sometimes loving more means finding the moral courage to help somebody else talk less. That would stretch me. But I'm just giving all these examples to show there are just so many different ways, really different ways that we can find to give freely of ourselves. All of those ways that I talked about, and many, many more, come from divine love. And so they bring joy. They bring joy to the people that are touched by it, but they bring joy to the giver too. And I think that's the essence of my message today. We're not giving in order to get something from somebody or the world. Transactional giving like that doesn't usually bring unexpected joy and healing. You're just kind of doing what the world thought you were going to do. But when we give freely of ourselves, that's when things get really interesting. It's not that you get something as much as that you discover the good that's always been here. You discover the health or the supply or the joy, the strength. You find that life is bigger and better than you realized. And you have something to contribute to it. You find that larger context of God. And you're right in the middle. And in that, anything that seems unlike God, like an argument with your parents or a swollen jaw or unemployment or grief or sadness, anything like that, just loses its grip. I mean, it's just not part of the larger context that we're living in. It's my understanding that Jesus understood that and lived it and wanted others to understand it. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, I am come that they might have life and that they have it more abundantly. This is the abundant living that Jesus was talking about. Abundance isn't about accumulating. It's about discovering the good, the remarkable, unexpected good that's within us, and letting that lead us forward to do something good and big. And I'm sure that sounds good to everybody. I'm sure that sounds good to all of us. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that it sometimes starts with a few tough moments. Not because what we're giving up is all that, or because what we're giving our consent to do is too hard for us. I mean, neither of those is true. But it can start with some tough moments because we're actually giving up a view. That's what it is. That's the sacrifice. You know, we're giving up an old view of ourselves or our neighbor or the world that has somehow come to be important to us, or at least feel entrenched or something. But those outgrown views only feel rock solid until you test them a little bit and discover that they're not. And then we're freed up to receive and just experience the joy that just makes our hearts sing. That's a fabulous moment. Those are fabulous moments, I should say. And in those, you feel a momentum just carrying you forward. It's not something that you're generating, it's God. This is why I was saying, infinite mind works on our behalf. This is God working on our behalf. It's something that comes to us in the form of ideas and healing, strength, even physical strength. You find yourself able to open a jar that you couldn't the day before, or something like that. I mean, really tangible, good ways that we see. That presence, that tangible presence, that proof of God's care for us has a really special name. It's Christ. And that is the healing, loving activity of God working on our behalf. And that presence just filled Jesus' thought and so his life. And he was known by the title Christ because of the way that he experienced that, expressed that power of God with us. And Christ is ongoing. Christ is here in 2023, bringing mental clarity and comfort and solutions to today's problems. In fact, it says in the New Testament, we continue to share in all that Christ has for us. Well, somebody who showed that we continue to share in all that Christ has for us in a really practical way was Mary Baker Eddy. She was a spiritual seeker, eventually a religious reformer, who was born in 1821 to a devout Christian New England family, to parents who loved the Bible. I mean, they loved and read and often quoted the Bible to Mary and all of their kids. And so Mary and her siblings just grew up in this atmosphere of spiritual discovery and Bible debate and prayer and church going. And in all of that, this was really in her youth and young adulthood, she learned more of the healing power of God-centered living. And that might seem fairly obvious to us or even intuitive today, but that was pretty cutting edge at that point to link God-centered living with physical well-being. Then as an adult, this ongoing prayer of hers, which had been deepening over the decades, and her own relationship with God just lifted her out of chronic ill health. Big game changer for her there. Lifted her out of this chronic ill health and healed her of some acute injuries that others thought were life-threatening. So you can tell there's just a lot going on. This is a really impactful time in her life, and I'm kind of telescoping events here, but it was during this time that she discovered what she referred to as Christian Science. That is, as we've talked about just a little bit, that's an explanation of God's nature. And it's an explanation of our nature, as expressions of God. Christian Science shows the unbreakable connection between us and divine love. And I have found just brings a more tangible presence of God's healing power in our experience. And that's a presence that necessarily includes healing for ourselves and for those around us. You might say, how does that work? Well, I used the phrase spiritual seeker earlier. Mary Baker Eddy would consider herself a spiritual seeker. I think I consider myself that. Maybe some of you do as well. And when Mary Baker Eddy discovered Christian Science, the ideas were finding their ways into the hands of spiritual seekers. And this became very important to her. When she discovered Christian Science, she realized that she could heal all kinds of disease, chronic and acute, in herself and in anybody. And that had a huge impact on her. And when she discovered that, she realized that if she was going to get these ideas out to the world, that was what she wanted to do. She wanted to get these ideas out to the world as much as she could. And so she went to local Christian churches in her area, talking to the pastors and ministers and telling them about this shared Christian healing principle that they all could apply, totally expecting that they would start preaching it from their pulpits. And when they didn't do that, she realized, okay, if I'm going to get these ideas out, I'm going to have to write them in a book. And so she did that in her book, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures. I am so grateful that she did that. I'm so grateful that she not only discovered the healing method that Christ Jesus had been practicing centuries earlier, but also that she really wrestled with it. That was her thing. She just stayed with it until she understood it more and more, and then was able to write up her findings in Science and Health. Well, as you can imagine, interest in her book grew. With this healing textbook. Interest in her book grew. Her own reputation as a healer grew. And as a result, many people have written biographies of Mary Baker Eddy. And there's an anecdote in one of those biographies that I'd like to share here. And it's related to what we're talking about. First of all, it shows how Mary Baker Eddy was always trying to have others make their own discovery of Christian Science, wrestle with the ideas themselves and make it their own. But also, it's like the motorcycle kid that I talked about. It's about a guy who kind of reluctantly at first found it within himself to give freely, and how that impacted himself and his family and his community for decades after that. So Mary Baker Eddy discovered Christian Science in the 1860s, and from that point on, her life is just devoted to getting the word out, mostly through healing, teaching, preaching, and writing and publishing her book. Towards the end of the century, her life is really given over to teaching and writing. By that time, the healing work was being done by a rising generation of healers, her students. But at the same time, there was this sea captain, also in New England. He was named Joseph Eastman, who had just returned from an international voyage to discover that his wife, who had been bedridden before he left even, was in worse shape than ever. He was afraid for her health. He was probably afraid for her life. He had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy, this New England woman that was practicing this revived Christian healing, taking prayer requests and responding in real time. And so he goes to her house, and she answers the door, and he explains his story, and he asks her if she can heal his wife. And to his amazement, she turns to him and just with this heart full of love and respect says, "Captain Eastman, why don't you heal your wife yourself?" And remember, he had just heard of Christian Science. He had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy. But I think she recognized that if Eastman were to be involved in the healing, or want to be involved in that was it. If Eastman wanted to be involved in the healing, that was going to do more for the healing work in his life and his community and that type of thing than if she took the case. Like the difference between giving somebody a fish and teaching them to fish. Well, she was about to start teaching a class on Christian healing, and so she invited Captain Eastman to enroll in it, which he did. And he began praying for his wife, who improved until a complete recovery took place. And she was so amazed, Mrs. Eastman, and touched and inspired that she then enrolled in a class with Mary Baker Eddy. And eventually both husband and wife became full-time Christian Science healers. And what had been this kind of invalid wife and her concerned husband became this power couple that helped and healed in their community for a decade. Universal healing science that he and anybody could turn to. I can just imagine that moment took a lot of moral courage, because I think he, in his mind, went from patient or prayer requester or even victim to healer in that moment. It would have been easier, or would have felt easier at least. I don't think it would have been easier. It would have felt easier to have Mary Baker Eddy take the case. But Eastman, like all of us, had something within himself, something awesome and God-derived that his circumstances were demanding. And Christian Science showed him that. Showed him, empowered him, showed him that life was bigger and better than he thought, and he had something to contribute to it. And we all do. We all have something remarkable within. And I think this is why I say, I don't know if I could have given this lecture 3 years ago even. I feel like this type of thinking is just what is being demanded of people that want to help the world today. It's different maybe than what we needed to do in the 80s or 90s. This thinking bigger, including the world in our prayers, even when we're praying for ourselves. I feel like that's a really new demand. There's a Christian Science teacher, pretty experienced Christian Science healer, that wrote an article years ago, and he was talking about prayer in there, and he said, sometimes we pray as if we're a good apple in a barrel of rotten apples, trying to keep ourselves good. And he said, any grower is going to tell you that that's hard to do, But if we go back to what we know is true, if we start with God is spirit, the creator, God is totally good, so creation is totally good. If we start there, then we realize, okay, so I'm a good apple in a barrel of good apples. And that's a lot easier to stay good, in that case. And it benefits us and it uplifts our sense of the world. And I think that's the way we want to go forward. I find even if I'm praying for myself these days, there needs to be for the prayer to be effective or to work faster, we like that. It seems like really helpful to include some element of all of creation. Can I recognize whatever truths I'm affirming about myself? Can I see that they're true for all of creation? That seems really relevant and helpful these days. So Mary Baker Eddy talks about this a little bit in one of her books. Talks about this bigger sense of prayer and action. She says, she's speaking rhetorically, who should care for everybody? It's enough, say they, to care for a few. But the good done, the love that foresees more to do, stimulate philanthropy and are an ever-present reward. And I love the sound of that. Stimulating philanthropy. That to me is that, if we see creation as perfect, if we start there, if we recognize God's good creation as completely good, maybe that's a better way to say it, you recognize more of the potential of humanity. And then you want to jump in and be part of it. In fact, I don't know if all of you, I'm going to digress a little bit, but I feel like, I don't know if any of you have noticed this, like the messaging that I'm hearing from environmentalists or climate change experts or something, I feel like has changed a little bit. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was more kind of scaring us into action. And I'm not saying, a wake-up call was needed, at least for me. There was something helpful in that. But I feel like today it's more like showing the possibilities and encouraging all of us to jump on this good team that might be able to do something good. I feel like it's a more hope-based message. And I find that really effective. That stirs something in me. I'm more likely to do good action, I think, when I get that type of message. And I feel like that's in this. Stimulating philanthropy is that rising tide that lifts all boats, and we see more of the potential of good. When we find our lives in that, when we find our lives in that love that foresees more to do, we find that ever-present reward that she's talking about. And it's really joyful. And in fact, I find that those moments of discovering more of the good that's there, moving out, getting outside of myself a little bit, widening my vista, the joy that comes in those moments kind of eclipses any feeling of needing or wanting something myself. And it's not that you don't get what you need, because we do. It's just that you've kind of gotten over yourself, and you're seeing this this possibility of being impelled forward by divine love, like the motorcycle kid did. Yeah, that's a good feeling, being impelled forward by divine love that way. I think the only thing that would keep us from doing that is if we felt inadequate. And I'm just going to glide over this a little bit. I just want to bring this up a little bit. I know what that feels like. I mean, I think, what would keep us from giving more of ourselves is if we felt unable to, or as if we didn't have something awesome and God-derived within ourselves to give. What I am discovering is that taunt, I guess, of inadequacy is not accurate. I mean, it's not something that we need to listen to. It shouldn't keep us from giving freely of ourselves. Anything that holds us back from that is not working for us. It's not working in our corner. And that kind of resistance to giving freely of ourselves has a name in the Bible, and it's the carnal mind. That's just resistant thinking. Noisy thinking that's based on a belief that something other than God, something other than divine love is impelling our lives forward. But we've talked about this. God is spirit. We're spiritual. That means that rather than something like luck, our lives are really impelled by spirit and qualities of spirit. And I know that shrinking back a little bit from those awesome qualities can feel natural. Or appropriate or something. We might hesitate to wholeheartedly identify ourselves as complete and spiritual and athletic and beautiful and perfect. But I find that if we do that, we're really shrinking back from the promise. If we embrace that promise, if we embrace that invitation, then we just naturally experience more of those qualities. And we find that abundant living that Christ Jesus was talking about. So I had an experience along those lines that I want to share to wrap up here. And for me, it was discovering more of my innate decisiveness, I think, and strength and confidence. That was what was needed. And when I gave my consent to that, God brought out something really wonderful in me, something worth sharing. So this was years ago. I was in graduate school, and I had a pretty aggressive rash on my chest, and it was inflamed, itchy. It sometimes died down a little bit, but it never really went away. And like I said, it had been there a while. At least since I had started college. I was in graduate school for a long time. I was in graduate school for such a long time, my parents started calling it gradual school. So this had been there too long. I think because it didn't hurt acutely and because I could hide it with the right clothes, which I would do, I didn't really do anything about it. And I also think that was kind of how I was living my life at the time too. I hadn't discovered the spiritual authority or the joy that comes from God-centered living. Life felt like something that just kind of happened to me. And giving freely of myself was not on my screen yet. But I was a young adult. I was finding my relationship with God, praying in my free time, reading the Bible and science and health. I really wanted physical healing. So one day One day I was reading the Bible in Science and Health, and I came across an idea in this book that was really meaningful to me. It said, inflammation, of course that's just what I was dealing with, inflammation is fear. An excited state of thought, an excited state of mortals that is not normal. Inflammation is fear. So I was struck by how almost mathematically that was expressed. I mean, it was like inflammation equals fear. Like if you're inflamed, you're probably afraid. And I thought, well, I'm not afraid, I don't think. But as I reflected on it a little bit, I could see there were areas in my life where I was making decisions based on fear. For example, I would stay in unhealthy relationships too long because I was afraid of being alone, navigating life alone. Or maybe I was afraid of the demand that more productive relationships would put on me. I was in this really challenging graduate program, not because I loved the field, but because I was afraid of not getting a good job otherwise. And sometimes I even packed too much lunch in the morning because I was afraid of being hungry in the afternoon. I could tell that these fears were not helpful to me. It was good though to uncover them. I mean, I could see then that they were not helping me be a better contributor in my life or in my work or that type of thing. That kind of carnal mind mentality was keeping my focus small, though, and on myself. And I had identified that. The good news is the carnal mind is not intelligent. I mean, it's not like I took this reasonable assessment of my life and thought, oh, yeah, it's too hard. I can't do it. I mean, that wasn't it. I wasn't inadequate. Fear was making me feel inadequate. And when I realized that, it was like a light bulb went on, I thought of that Bible verse that maybe many of you know in 1 John that says, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. And the only perfect love I knew was God's love. It's so encouraging and welcoming. And so I thought, okay, how can I, to blot out fear, I mean, to really see the nothingness of it, how can I just fill my day with God's love or awareness of God's love? And so I started looking for examples of it in my experience, and it wasn't hard. I was a graduate student. As I said, I had this cute little apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, it was safe, it was near campus. I liked that. I had friends and family nearby that made me feel loved. I had a job. It wasn't lucrative, but it put me through grad school. All of that made me see just the tangible evidence of God's care in my life. And from there, it was pretty easy to expand that then to seeing God's care for everybody. And I'm sure you all have done this type of thing. It kind of sneaks up on you sometimes. I mean, just seeing it in, this might sound cliched, but like a beautiful sunrise, or, but even more maybe in like somebody being unexpectedly selfless or generous at the grocery store. Where you just, oh gosh, that made my day. That feeling, that's God. Or my favorite is little kids playing. You guys know this. Little kids are so good at just loving life, just laughing because life is good. And it just, they're not even aware of it. They're just kind of emitting joy out into the world. And so once I did that, I really had this feeling of God's ever-presence and care and love for creation. And, I certainly felt safer and loved in that, but I felt stronger too. And I mean, it just made me love life. I thought, I want to be a contributor in this good creation. I want to be part of that. I want to be a force for good in this good creation that I'm part of. And I think that gave me the confidence to ask myself some difficult questions and respond. Was I in this relationship to give more of myself? Or was I trying to stay comfortable in a too small life? Was I in this graduate program to give to the field? Or was I trying to get just the right professor's name on my resume so I could get a good job? And that gave me the confidence to just make some changes in my life. I had the confidence to answer those questions. To my amazement, I was able to leave the unhealthy relationships. I mean, that would have seemed just unthinkable a week or two earlier. But it just seemed like the most natural, appropriate thing to do for me and for everybody. I didn't quit grad school. I tweaked my program a little bit, and I found something that I could engage in a little bit more. And instead of trying to chase this one professor in my department, this famous professor, I actually did a little bit different research project. I found somebody else to work with in the department, and she and I had a wonderful, very fruitful year as I wrote my dissertation. And our research results were so solid that they were quoted by the research community for years after that. So really good outcome there. I think my eating habits even got better during this time. Well, I really felt like Eastman, like the high school kid, I could just feel myself going from victim to healer in this. And I loved that feeling. I loved that transformation. So a couple weeks after I challenged myself to ask these questions, I was changing clothes, and I discovered that the rash was completely gone. All signs of inflammation, all signs of fear even, were gone. That rash had not budged for 5 years. But then when I just was willing to embrace this unexpected way forward of giving a little bit more of myself. I hope that makes sense when I use that phrase. I mean, thinking a little bit bigger, it's not just thinking of others, it certainly includes that, but just thinking of creation, I think, and our place in that and how we can be a force for good. That was so transformative for me. And other people saw the transformation. They didn't necessarily know the physical healing that I had, but they certainly saw the transformation, and I even started getting prayer requests during that time, which was just fulfilled a long-term goal I had of helping others. There's such healing power in this approach of giving freely of ourselves. It's quiet work. You know, I mean, it's low-profile work. It's you and God working out something wonderful together. And then that blossoms into something that touches the world. And, you know, being kind, thinking good thoughts, that's important. I mean, it's foundational, I think. But I bet everybody here is already doing that. You know, I mean, the really transformational work that I did, the really transformative thinking, had to do with facing fears, and then giving my consent to experiencing more of God's qualities. In my case, experiencing more decisiveness and strength and love. So I just want to thank you all for sticking with me till the end here, finding this unexpected way forward. There's more going on here than we realize. You know, Spirit's doing more than we realize. You have more within you than you realize. And Jesus continues to be our best example. We can keep asking ourselves, what would Jesus do? And the ideas in Science and Health and your own prayers will give you the tools you need to bless and to be blessed and to give freely and to gain all. Thank you all for coming.